Welcome to the Education Corner, a podcast by Education Choices magazine.
Education Corner podcast would like to welcome Dr. Joseph Spence, Master of Dulwich College. Dr. Spence has been there since 2009 and announced in December of last year that sadly he will be retiring in the summer of 2025. So we still have a further year with him left. After over 30 years working in education, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to the podcast.
Lovely to be with you again.
On your website, it says our ethos at Dulwich is one of equality, and our values are founded in respect and support for others, alongside inspired teaching, genuine scholarship, and free learning in and beyond the classroom. Could you tell us a little bit more about this ethos and the values at Dulwich College?
Oh, no, thank you, Chloe. Quite a sentence to unpack. I think we tried to fit everything into one sentence there. But the first thing I'd say is that I took a long while before I dared to talk about ethos and values that explicitly. And certainly, for example, to use it as a link on a footer in an email, because I'm so conscious of how one can trip up. And I'm so conscious of that sense that values and even an ethos can seem to grow out of that away day where you come up with some words that are obviously good and you throw them together. But I'd say that synopsizing that, the first part of our definition of our ethos and values is equity, respect, and service. And I'd say I'm confident to say that and to just keep it to that, because that's grown out of what I'd call the social revolution of recent years and how we faced up to the challenges of Black Lives Matter and everyone's invited, and questions of gender and sexual politics, which have become so central to debate. And in looking through that and what we learned through that, and in repositioning ourselves in the context of that, it struck me that those are the things that should matter, that we have always said and have hoped to live to that sense of equity, that all are equal and all deserve to be treated equal. And if you are here, be it talking of staff, from operational staff through teaching staff, or if you're a child here, an apparent superstar, an old-fashioned independent school hero, or someone who hasn't yet or hasn't got about you that aura, you should feel that you're equally valued. I always love it in occasions like this, if something's just happened that can make that feel real. And I've just been doing a little interview with a very interesting young person who is looking for a certain award. And in the midst of it, he used the phrase, said, well, I'm going in for this because I've never been top at anything. And I thought, that in a way pulled the heartstrings, but in another way, that is true. But look, we are finding you your niche. We're finding you your platform. We're finding this area where you can come to the fore and lead. Respect is just what I would demand of people. That almost feels like what every head teacher should have as their central tenet. Are we seen to be people who respect everybody who we work with, everyone who visits us? We must lead by that, otherwise our institution won't. And the strongest thing is that sense of for others. I'm constantly telling the pupils and parents now, really, that I'm so convinced that in schools like ours, only what you do for yourselves and what you do for others will make a difference between you and the others looking for that job, that place at a competitive university. And I suppose then when you go on and you go give those second lines of what we talk about, free learning is to me the way that you can do that. You don't do it just to the syllabus. You do it in what you offer your pupils beyond the syllabus. So that's why, Chloe, I'd say that after a long time of resisting, sometimes demands from governors or senior staff or parents as to why don't we make more of who we are, what we stand for, I'd say I'm only comfortable to do that once it's felt it's come through the cauldron and there are things we know we have to stand by. And I suppose the other thing to say about one's values are, and when I first stated them and addressed all staff about them, and then all pupils at assembly about them, I was very keen to stress these are not the things that we're saying, rah, rah, we're best at. These are our objectives. This is what we aim to be better in these areas, not to say we're best. So that's where that's come from.
Thank you. And could you tell us a little bit about the work that is taking place on the bursary provision at Dulwich College?
I'm at that stage now, as you say, coming to the end of a formal career in headship and at the end of what will be 16 years at Dulwich. So I suppose the keynote is to say that nothing will please me more, I think, when legacy is talked about as it is at the moment, than the fact that we've doubled the amount that we spend on bursaries and doubled the amount of bursaries and doubled the amount of means tested free places in my time here. And that's only part of a journey. I'd have hoped we'd have gone further by now. There were the knockbacks of the COVID years that probably mean we're slightly less far on than we want. And now the challenges of the potential of VAT on school fees and a loss of business rate relief. My governors have been completely behind the mission, still continuing. But what it's done here is to say that probably what we're expending will plateau for now, but only to build again in the future. I would love a needs blind Dulwich. I believe there'll be a needs blind sector really before too long. I think that's the way things are going. I think that, I know we'll probably come on to talk more about independent state school relations and national education later. But to me, that sense that fees are now reaching a level that surely all there can be is a sliding scale of fees to capture the children we would want to give this opportunity to. And so in my mind's eye, yes, things will rise with whatever schools have to do to work within that 20% on fees with that tax on parents choosing independent education, but that then we can look creatively at that. But I think the other thing that struck me in recent years, and that after I stepped down from Dulwich and even before it, I'm probably intent on lobbying on, is schools like ours have to become less fee dependent. The fact that we have had parents who can afford these fees has meant that in a way schools have been able to continue to lift the fees above the rate of inflation for many, many years. In the good times, that's what happened. Many schools have been very sensitive as soon as things have turned economically against the interests of notably parents working in the financial sector. But I do predict that that will be more likely to be the future. And so in a sense, whether you call them bursaries or whether it's just accepted, that there will be, yes, full fee remission for those in need, but then that sliding scale of pay what you can, I think that might well be the modeling of the future. It'll probably need more schools to become more commercially minded. It'll probably need more schools to think about things like the international market. It'll lead to a lot more zero financing within to make sure you're cutting costs where they can be. But that would be my sense of where we're going. So very proud with what we've achieved. Wish we could achieve more. Continue to be absolutely focused on a needs blind Dulwich going back to its foundational roots. But in the interim, wondering if those other things I've talked about aren't most likely to evolve.
Have you considered as a school, the Notting Hill and Ealing High, they've recently added their 1%. So parents who are paying fees, I think they're paying 1% more if they can afford to kind of cover the bursary. Is that the sort of thing?
That's interesting. That's something that, as you can imagine, Chloe, gets talked about here occasionally. And something I wouldn't say we wouldn't do. I mean, in a way, I always feel that that can be a little artificial. The fee is the fee, isn't it, really? And we could easily say, do you know what, 1% is going to go towards bursaries. But I'm rather wanting to create a community of philanthropists who want to go beyond that and give. And I must say, I wonder if your listeners have in mind, they must have lots of very wealthy old boys who give to their bursary fund. We're raising towards 2 million in good years, 1.2 last year, even in more testing times. But do you know what? So much comes from existing parents. Those very people who can do a little more and want a school that is socially diverse. And I suppose I'd love to leave it voluntarist. I'd like to leave it that those who can and want to become part of a community of philanthropists rather than that we put that on a fee as such. I'm not trying to sound biased about this. Many ways to do it. And that would certainly be one that I think schools should consider.
On your website, sorry, I keep quoting you, but at the heart of our founders' mission is philanthropy, which is what you've just been referring to. And I am aware that many other London schools have stated the same as this. In fact, I was speaking to some parents this morning. But it's our ambition that 50% of our pupils will, in the future, be in receipt of financial assistance in the form of either scholarships or bursaries. Do you have anything further to add to this?
I think I've touched that really, haven't I, Chloe? And that we're up to about 35% on bursaries and scholarships, but I wouldn't want to overdo that. We're reducing the scholarship pot and raising the bursary pot. And so, you can quote any figure really. And as I say, at the moment, I think what we're going to do is sustain our bursaries. We spend 4.8 million a year on bursaries. We want to sustain that and be careful as we look to the future as to where can we move to develop further. And those other ideas I've talked about, I think, have probably gazumped now something that might sound rather artificial, like a 50% aim.
In your Heads Welcome You state, we're alert to the changing nature of work. How do you see work changing for future generations, and what is Dulwich doing to prepare your pupils for this?
I think I've long been a real advocate of careers education. Is such a dull phrase, isn't it? It sort of takes the lifeblood out of what we're talking about. And I'm far happier talking about, yes, preparation for the world of work. We love networking here. I love the fact that we constantly, from very young age, put our pupils in the presence of people, often very young people working. I'm not a great fan of that word relatable, but I must admit I've watched it happen. It's not finding the High Court judge to come and talk to the kids who want to be lawyers. It's finding the someone just 25, just gone into chambers, just taken up first job, and them talking about how recently they were sitting in the very chairs that the pupils are sitting in and how they got there. And what excites me is how many different paths there are into the world of work. So I'd start by saying networking, and our networking here tends to be inclusive rather than exclusively for the children of Dulwich. We open all our careers fairs to the wider network of Southwark Schools Learning Partnership of 14 state schools, 4 independent schools. And I think we do that because our kids have to know who the competition is, how brilliant children are from all of these different backgrounds, and how you have to, it goes back a bit to my fact of what you do for yourself and prove you've done it rather than your school or family have done it for you, and what you do for others will be the keynote. And I'd relate that to the world of work as much as I would to the world of learning or the world of socialization or whatever it might be. Yes, since we last spoke, probably AI has come even more centrally to the question. And, how many jobs will there be? What nature will they be? I don't want a crystal ball gaze, but all I'd say is that every interaction we've already had with AI tends to show that after the first shock of, oh my God, look what it can do, is X any longer needed, comes the second thought of, do you know what? The teacher testing, do you understand that essay? If you say you wrote part of it and part of it was downloaded, let's analyze that. Let's have a viva about that. Let's look at what that term means. Let's look deeper at that. Let's challenge whether that is right or wrong or objective or prejudiced. And I'm enjoying the fact, I think, good learning is really still Socratic. It's still a dialogue between someone who produces and someone who challenges what's been produced. And if there's a hybrid future in which the presentation of an essay comes from pupil plus machine, but then you switch the machine off and talk to the pupil, you'll still be able to challenge the pupil as to what do they think, feel, know, understand. Has it made them wiser? Where are we looking? And in that way, I'd say that I think all is change and all is the same in the world of work. To me, our job in school is to prepare kids for leadership, for teamwork, for great communication, verbally and on paper, and through social media and AI, and to be able to think away from the syllabus, out of the box. And although all is changing, I don't think much will go beyond that. Technical know-how, making sure that you're in charge of these things, and an alertness to the dangers of them, ethical and practical, yes, that's ever more central. But that's been the case for a long while now. When we started here, turned almost our computer science into what I started talking about as informatics, and looking instead look at all the different ways you've got to look at it. I think the ethics of use of the internet, use of AI should be a core early learning, and that will then impact on who you are as a learner and as a potential worker of the future. So yes, change is coming. It's not for me to be the crystal ball gazer. And yet I think, as always, even though there are new devices, certain things will actually remain the same. And I think those human aptitudes I've talked about are those that we'll still need to develop among these people who will be, if we do our job right, and in spite of a changing social world, going on to be significant players in whatever world of work they decide to go into.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I've discussed it on the podcast many times with different people that I've spoken to. I think that, as you're very aware, that it's going to be the fact that they may do multiple jobs in their future. It's their resilience and their ability to adapt to change.
I mean, I love that sense that these kids will work on 4 continents in 4. A vocation might still be found, but it probably won't last a lifetime. I mean, a vocation in a sense should, but it will lead to offshoots, and you'll one day be doing your startup and the next day working for a big corporate and then taking your sabbatical and doing some learning. It will be far more variegated and maybe all the healthier for that.
I couldn't agree more. We found an interview that you gave the Dulwich Society Journal in the winter of 2009. It wasn't long after you joined the school, and they stated, he arrives in Dulwich at a somewhat difficult time for independent schools. The state of the economy is making life more difficult for fee-paying parents who are already stretched financially. Low interest rates on investments make further provision of scholarship and bursaries more problematic. The public's confidence in the A-level system is shaky. I think it's slightly ironic that we sit here in 2024 and we're probably not in too different a situation. How do you feel that you dealt with those challenges, and do you feel that that's going to influence decisions that you make even in the final year at Dulwich College?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, isn't that interesting? 2009, we tend to look back at 2009 and the early 2010s as quite an amazing halcyon period. The recovery from crashes of 2008, even though they were still reverberating in some areas in 2011-12, actually, if you think of everything that's happened since 2016, they look like a golden age, really. I don't usually believe in golden ages, but actually you'd look back to that and say, my God, we'd never had it so good. I think we have again hit a moment of crisis. It's where I started without needing to be directed there. The financial pressures on the sector are immense and probably more challenging than they've ever been for those of us who've been around for 30 years. The sorts of challenges to the independent sector that have been threatened at times in the past are now probably more real and more likely to lead to particular financial penalty than ever before. Early in my career probably at the stage of being a housemaster, and early in my time as a headmaster, that was the moment of Susie Leather's challenge from the Charity Commission on the charitable status of independent schools. And everyone thought that was the greatest challenge we'd face. But that was faced up to legally and never quite went away, but receded. The financial challenges now, I think, will always be there. But I sense we're moving towards, so what will happen next? And that's where I dared to talk about things like that sliding scale of fees. And I hope I'm not preempting too much where you'd like to go next, Chloe, but my vision now is that after we've had the imposition of the 20% in school fees, disappearance of business rate relief, in a way, if we have by then, Prime Minister, and it's likely to be Keir Starmer and a Labour government, saying, there, we did that to you as a sector. We believed we had a right to do it, to win back for the Treasury money to invest in education, notably, they say, in teachers. My argument will be, well, that's great, isn't it? Because now we can draw a line. Now you haven't chosen to attack our charitable status. You've left us as charities, high fee paying charities who can be penalized in the way that you've done. But surely now the future lies in looking at a single national system of education that includes state providers and many other providers too. What are the MATs, the multi-academy chains in so many ways from Lord Harris's academies onwards? But you saying you need partners to provide the national education you want to provide. Well, isn't it time now to take the independent schools into that too? And therefore, to look for things helped by bodies like Springboard, looking particularly at the needs of looked after children and children from more impoverished backgrounds, and giving them the opportunities of getting into independent schools, which can provide them with the additional support they need to make sure that it's no longer the case that only 1% of them get to universities, certainly to Russell Group universities. Post Dulwich, I think that's where a lot of my work will be. I'm looking forward to lobbying towards that future, which does away with what Andrew Adonis always talked about, that Berlin Wall between the state and the independent sector, that actually was disappearing in the early years of this millennium and has been recreated, I think, for political purposes. But I don't think it's as great a wall as people think it is. And I think there are many ways to break through it and to break it down and to look to a future where every educational provider in this country of faith schools and special schools and independent schools and academies and state schools can actually work together to make teachers and to determine what education is necessary for UK PLC to punch above its weight in the world as it should be doing.
I think it's very interesting. I've spoken to many different heads on the podcast, and it certainly seems that there is, and I agree with you, it's one of the things we work hard as a magazine to highlight, a lot more partnership work taking place than perhaps is necessarily being shared by the press and different people. And also through the consultancy, we have many parents who have a very deep sense of social conscience. Now, what have been the greatest changes and achievements that you feel you have been able to celebrate in the time you've been at Dulwich College?
Well, we've talked about the social mission, so I suppose I'd start there and say that the doubling of bursaries and the creation again of Dulwich as a school renowned for access. That work was going on before my arrival, so I wouldn't want to claim it personally, but I'd want to say that that's where I've put a great focus. You mentioned nicely in that first statement, free learning. That here means that we're absolutely committed to be a school that doesn't just believe that education can be sufficient if it simply gets you good grades in public exams, but it's got to create that love of learning, that aptitude for lifelong learning, that belief in you taking away from here. We've talked about vocation, Chloe, but I'd say not just a vocation, but an avocation, a hobby, something for life, a passion that will help you to be human and to express your humanity. And in that sense, I'm very proud of that. And the new work in progress that, again, I hope to leave behind will be that commitment to service. We've created a number of schemes, both within for our own pupils and in conjunction with our alumni, to really create a sense of where will Dulwich be in the next century. I had the privilege of overseeing our 400th anniversary, and now we're up to 405 years old, and I've dared to create the 500 Club and Impact 500, suggesting that these are bodies that are all about the teaching of philanthropy. So we don't any longer just have a school charity that we raise money for. We bring in the charity and they work on what is it to set up a charity? How do you discover its purpose? How do you work with people? How can you make sure you're not patronizing? We've got a brilliant group set up by two young old boys called the Uganda Schools Project this year. And it's not just the money we're raising for the Uganda Schools Project that's making a difference. It's the fact that they are doing work with our year 8s and beyond, not just assemblies, but workshops on what is charity? How do you start a charity? What is philanthropy? How do you dedicate yourself? How can you give back? And that's proving very successful. So I think further embedding that in my last 15 months will be important, and hoping to leave that as part of the future.
Are you? I don't know if you're allowed to tell us, but cheeky question at the end. What plans do you have after you leave Dulwich College? Because I don't imagine you're the sort of man that sits still for very long.
No, I mean, I announced that I'd step down, but the most obvious reason being 16 years is a long while. And I think if we think of a generation as 15 years, and I'd probably have gone early had it not been for COVID, there was a sense of re-establishing things, resetting things after COVID. But I'd always thought of seeing Dulwich to its 400th in 2019, and this has been a sort of after period. But what I've been collecting, some of it has sort of come through subliminally in my answer to other questions. I'm looking forward to really working on projects relating to independent state school partnerships and the future of education, and the future of education and work, actually, as one area. I have a number of charities in which I play a non-exec role, and I could imagine looking to play an executive role in a charity going forward as well. And I do a lot of creative writing. I've transformed from being a playwright into a librettist, and I've started work on a number of projects with a range of composers of song and music theatre and opera. And I think those three things will keep me very happily busy.
Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I know that you are an incredibly busy man. Obviously, it sounds like there's a lot of exciting work still to do.
You bet, Chloe. And thank you. Thank you for your pertinent questions and giving me a chance to think it all through.